Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome. My name is Tim Flocka, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Commonwealth. Commonwealth is a national nonprofit building financial security and opportunity for vulnerable households through innovation and partnerships. And I am profoundly grateful that all of you are taking time to join us today to talk about wealth, and specifically democratizing wealth building and aiming to help close the race and gender wealth gaps. I want to thank the National Community Reinvestment Coalition for making space for this conversation. And again, for all of you, I hope we will have a conversation today. I am really pleased with the panelists we have who will come on in just a moment. Tia Hodges leads the MetLife Foundation and is also its president and CEO, as well as being an adjunct professor at New York University. As probably many of you know, MetLife has been a leader in financial health and investing in financial health, and is also an invaluable partner to Commonwealth, my organization. We're also joined by Willa Tellickson-Flash, who is the director of community at Public. As she'll explain, Public is a leading fintech working to make the public markets work for all people. We're also privileged to partner with Public here at Commonwealth. I just have a few opening comments to frame the conversation, and then we'll dive in. As I may have already said, in my view, and I hope that you'll agree, today's topic is profoundly important. Wealth and the wealth gaps matter a great deal. I imagine we all have our experience of this, but wealth is the part of families' finances that is not just about today or of the moment. It's the part about what we own, what has the potential to be long-term, durable, appreciating. Assets and wealth serve vital roles in families and households as a source of protection, some insulation against adversity, whatever it might be, some insurance. As, if you will, seed corn, an opportunity to invest in the future and possibly to make a lasting difference in a household's socioeconomics. Wealth also provides real self-determination and choice and agency about things like where you live or what kind of work you do, what kind of life you get to lead. For many of us, wealth, whether we want it to or not, is associated with dignity and self-worth, hardly surprising in a market-based economy. And wealth has the potential to enable legacy, if you will. It's a chance to pass something on to the next generation in your own family or in your community. And I think we'll see through the conversation, it's more than I've just listed here as well. For my organization, wealth is really what brought us together as a guiding principle 20 plus years ago, and it remains our guiding light. And what we've seen, as again, I imagine many of you have as well, is that there is no one solution to enabling wealth creation or attacking wealth gaps. We need solutions that speak to different households in different circumstances who are at different points in their own financial journeys. We, of course, are aware of well-known traditional pathways to wealth, things like homeownership, higher education, entrepreneurship. But we have to be clear that those traditional proven pathways have not been equally accessible to all. I imagine a lot of us have heard the statistic about the median wealth difference between Black and white households. It's now 8 to 1. But it is worth taking a moment and narrowing down and looking what happens when we add gender as well. If you combine race and gender, the median wealth for white men is 13 times the median wealth for Black women. If we then tighten again and look at age, a single Black woman under the age of 35 has a median wealth of just $101. Compared to $1,550 for a single Black man in that same age group, or $22,640 for a single white man in that same age bracket. So we have serious wealth gaps we have to remember. And beyond traditional pathways, it's also true that we live in an age and a time of rapid change in technology, but beyond that. And some of that change creates new possibilities for wealth creation. It's with those insights in mind that our traditional pathways have not been accessible to everyone, and that there is a rapidly changing world, including around wealth creation, that we sought support and have partnered with the MetLife Foundation here at Commonwealth to explore a portfolio of wealth building strategies. If that is of interest to you, you can find out more about it in our wealth building blueprint, which is available on our website, buildcommonwealth.org. The publication is Wealth Building Blueprints, the promise of traditional and new pathways for closing the wealth gap. All right, Tia, Willa, thank you so much. I will just say briefly before we dive in that if any of you who are joining us today have questions or comments, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A feature in Zoom. We will do our best to monitor those during the conversation, but we'll also save some time at the end. So Tia, could you just introduce yourself and add anything that you think would be helpful for the audience briefly, and then we'll take it over to you, Willa.
Hi, thanks so much, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, to share a perspective, and to also learn from all of the questions that may be coming in as well. I equally learned from that. My name is Tia Hodges. I head up corporate giving, employee engagement, and volunteerism, and president and CEO of MetLife Foundation based here in New York City. And as Tim mentioned, financial health has really been center of the plate of our work for many, many years. So really excited to have this conversation or join this conversation today to talk about it at the intersection of race and gender. And I think the perspectives are immensely important from all of us as we really seek to tackle this issue. So I'll turn it back over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Willa. Why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you for being here. For those of you who are tuning in, really looking forward to this conversation. And as you said, Tia, to learning from all of you as well. My name is Willa. I work at Public, which to provide a little bit of context on is an investing platform that allows members to build a portfolio of any asset class that includes stocks, ETFs, crypto, and alternative assets as well. I know that community, which has been in my title, can mean many different things at different organizations. So at Public, that's meant overseeing investor engagement and advancement. So providing our community of investors with the context, the educational content, and the conversations that they need to be confident in their investing decisions. And that confident piece is something that I've thought about a lot, because it was intimidation that I felt when I personally was trying to learn more about investing that drew me to this role and to this company. I've found it and find it incredibly frustrating that the financial world can feel like it's not for a lot of people. And so I was excited to be part of conversations about opening up investing in particular, but I think financial health and wealth building at large to more people, both by eliminating some of the taboo factor of talking about money and providing tools that allow us to actually address some of the obstacles that are in the way of democratizing wealth building. So really excited to be part of this conversation, and grateful to Commonwealth as well, who we've gotten the chance to do some work with, which we'll talk a little bit about later.
Thank you so much, both. Let's just start with really a baseline question, which I've alluded to in my remarks, but I want to get your thoughts. Why is wealth important, and how is it distinct from income? And what does this idea of democratizing wealth mean to each of you? Tia, can we come to you first on that one?
Sure. I will be radically transparent as I was with you in the prep meetings. I'll be radically transparent with the audience. I've been in philanthropy and nonprofit for many years. And I think when we first initially think about income and wealth, I use the word sometimes interchangeably, rightly or wrongly. And so I think first the definition around how income is generated, how wealth is generated, and I've been at MetLife Foundation just a little over a year, probably about 15 months at this point. And when we were launching our new strategy this year, we did a deep dive with a partner around our portfolio of work and really understanding what our wealth building activities or investments that we have from a grants perspective and what is income generation. So as my coach would say, you know, your time and talent helps you to generate income and wealth. And it was, you know, you need income in order to secure a home. And in many instances, companies will have benefits plans for their employees, whether healthcare or 401k or 403b, and the accumulation of those assets, and then the ability to also transfer that, right? When we talk about intergenerational wealth as well, the ability to transfer that from one generation to the next. So do I leave anything for my children or grandchildren, et cetera? But I think the clear definition is really important in terms of how we accumulate income, and then the idea around wealth is significantly important. And I finally got on the right track on that one. The other, from a philanthropic standpoint, and this is just my purview perspective, so the audience members and then the philanthropies that you connect with will all have a slightly different perspective, but also in our portfolio of work, you know, in our financial health work, we often talk about checking and banking accounts, access to savings, you know, having our nonprofit partners work with clients who are, accessing or saving money from a digital platform standpoint. So through fintech, for example, and that is important to understand what you have and the ability to save. That's equally important, but that's also a slightly different conversation that's also in our portfolio of work, such as benefits. So the conversation around public access to public and private benefits, and benefits looks like access to healthcare, to that 401k, 403b, and there are other benefits that employers are offering, sometimes the larger employers, whether that is also helping to, you know, buy a home or reduce student debt. So a variety of things go into, one, the definition, but being clear about that, but also the different avenues around building wealth and also generating income. So that's how I kind of take a look at that broader ecosystem. And we're really working to suss out what do our investments, our grants look like, and what do we really need to lean into, right? So if many Americans, for example, have access to checking and savings account, then do we need to really turn our focus on wealth building strategies? So that could be home ownership and increased savings and investing in the market. I think we may even talk blockchain and cryptocurrency. What does the emerging currencies look like? So I hope that's a little helpful context on how I think about the definitions, but also how we're really being introspective at MetLife Foundation on what we're supporting and where do we really need to start to turn our attention to, especially for communities of color and for women.
Yeah, I think to build on some of that, I think one of the pieces that you talked about, Tia, is this wealth being something that is so much more long-term than the income piece or even what you have in a checkings or savings at any given time. And mentioned homeownership and other things like that. Wealth is really something that unlocks opportunities over time, whether that be in your lifetime or in future generations as well. And because of my line of work, I think about wealth most through the lens of investing. And I think that that's something that has been historically an important way for individuals to build wealth over time, but also hasn't been something that's been easily accessible to most people up to present day, and still something that I think is that we have a lot of work to do. And I think the piece about democratizing wealth comes down to not only access, I think is a word that we use a lot, access to tools, but also how we are bringing these things to people and what the context that we're providing is, and the education that we're providing is, so that individuals feel empowered to take part in this for themselves, so that it doesn't stop with just one person. But I do think that long-term, over your own lifetime and future generations is the really important piece of understanding why it can be so powerful, because of all the different things that can be unlocked when it's a continuing journey for folks.
Thank you both. I want to keep the conversation going and also just take a moment to talk a little bit more about why race and gender are important in wealth. I threw out some numbers, and I saw in the chat, it sounds like some of you were interested in the source of those, which of course is great. But sometimes numbers alone don't really give a full story. And so briefly, I wonder, Tia and Willa, if you want, is there anything more you want to add about why race and gender really belong in this conversation?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. And we'll of course, pop in. I think we have to one word that we use here at the foundation is really an intersectional approach, right? And I think we also have to be really radically transparent. And this is hard to say a little bit, and they're tough conversations, but we really have to take a look at it, be radically transparent around how the wealth gap, whether by race, gender, access, what was created, started. And I think we really have to start there from a historical lens. And in the US, I think that's really hard to do without talking about race and gender. I don't know how we get I don't know that it's possible to get around it, to be quite frank. And so that plays a really important role. If we look at some of the policy over many years, decades and decades, there were certain jobs that were not included, for example, in the New Deal, being eligible for any type of retirement benefits, to how we think about decisions on loans for businesses or redlining. They all have a great impact. And most importantly, or equally important, is the conversation around narrative. So we don't really realize how the process works around why are certain groups not able to achieve intergenerational wealth, or even have difficulty building income, right? So when we look at occupational segregation, for example, and look at dollar per hour access to benefits, and then even the ability to accumulate income enough to be able to save for a home or get an education, or sometimes it's the perception around how much you can actually afford to put away in a 401k or 403b. I struggled with that when I worked in the nonprofit sector, but narrative is equally important. And so what are the stories we've been told or that we tell that say who's deserving of wealth, the ability to have that job, to have that, to be able to build that business, to be able to save, who has the right to own a home, and if so, in what neighborhoods. We've seen how homes are appraised as well, right? It's all a narrative, but it also has a very historical lens as well. So disaggregating data is immensely important, because if we are to have interventions from a philanthropic standpoint, and private sector and others, we really have to understand how each community of people, of individuals, are impacted, and it's not necessarily equitable across that lens. So I think distilling by race and gender from a historical as well as an historical play is immensely important, and then narrative is immensely important. And how do we shape shift and change that narrative? Because to me, some of the stories we tell, some of the ability to gain access to credit is about who is deemed valuable or who's deemed invaluable. So, just noodle on that for food for thought, but it is an important piece of the work. And that's really the hardest piece to manage and identify and create solutions, and have a collection of across the ecosystem actually take action to address those really big changes if we're talking about addressing gender and race where wealth gap is concerned.
Yeah, I think the narrative piece is something that that I've seen at play in our community of investors. Of we surveyed our community just over a year ago or so, and large populations of those using our platform identified as women, as people of color. The intersection piece is women of color as well, and I think the thing that I've seen in interacting with members time and time again is an appetite to participate, but not feeling like they themselves are an investor or can relate to what they've seen in media, but also just in what our understanding is of what wealth building is and who can take part in that. And so I think there's a lot of work on our end at Public and in similar organizations to think about how do we help people find their place within our ecosystem, even if that's a technological application. How do we help people find their footholds? How do we help them sort of connect the dots and be like, oh, I actually can participate in this. This is for me, as we create more and more tools in hopes of including more people in these practices. But because the narrative has been different for so long, that won't shift automatically just because we provide a tool or a piece of technology that allows someone to participate.
I appreciate all those comments, and I sometimes have an image in my head as I listen, and the one is something around the just how long it takes ocean liners or large ships to change direction. And the reason I think that image is in my head is that when we talk about wealth, it's already come up that this is a long-term activity, and the flip side of that, I think, is we inherit the legacy of the past in a way that might be a little bit different than for current income.
Yeah. Hey, Tim, can I just mention one or two other things? Just to circle back to the points also that Willa was making, but as we think about race and gender, it's always interesting some of the health outcomes that also exist when we talk about wealth and access to intergenerational wealth and income. And I always think about how financial freedom, what that feels like, and the emotional, socio-emotional, and just folks feeling liberated, which we all should feel and have a right to feel, but how when we engage and support women and communities of color to participate in investing or blockchain or other access to credit, how on a very individual community level, and also in their own families, likely have better outcomes, have the emotional capacity and mental capacity to manage life in a totally different way. And I think so much of what happens when there is such a wide wealth gap is there are obviously the economic and social stressors that are at play, but it also prohibits people from living, I believe personally and professionally, from living to their fullest potential, right? So if you're bogged down by having to work a couple of jobs and you can't save for retirement, how that impacts your home, your community ability to support and thrive, which we all have a right to. But I think also, there's a lot of research. Citi, in fact, in 2020 released research around the impact of the racial wealth gap and Black Americans in particular. I think it was at $16 trillion is lost. So it behooves all of us to ensure that we really address and find real world solutions to the issue. And some of that may be very hyper local, but we cannot forget the social, emotional, and mental aspects of not being part or having such a wide wealth gap plays in each of our communities.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you made those points, Tia. We find that all the time in our work, that when you step back, really no one benefits from the gaps we have today around short-term financial security or around wealth. Well, no one is an extreme statement, but there's so much to be gained for the economy, for families, for communities, for employers by attacking these issues. I want to shift the conversation a little bit, and let's go. We've been high level in concept. Let's get down into some nitty gritty, because I think that can be interesting. And to get us there, let's go to an audience poll. If our host could help us with that. And when you'll see here when it comes up is we're curious to get a take from all of you on our first audience poll about the idea that people living on low and moderate incomes should have access to investing. And I'm just here we go. You can read it for yourself. How important is it for people living on low and moderate incomes to have access to investing opportunities? And you have 3 simple choices there. If you could go ahead and click on that, I think it'll be interesting for all of us to get a beat on how this group is feeling. Is this a priority? Is it not a priority? Is it somewhere in the middle? And then we're going to go next to talk a little bit about some work we've done to try and enable access to investing for populations that frankly told us that they would like to have this opportunity but don't feel that they have, and what happens when we create some circumstances to allow that. I'm going to ask our fabulous NCRC hosts, can we close out the poll here and we can see some results? I think it's coming. Well, okay. This is an audience that I'll speak for myself, that I love, that there's strong interest, and you see the importance of creating this opportunity. So what I'd like to do is, let's go over to you, because as you well know, we have worked together, Commonwealth and public, to create an investing opportunity. Can you just tell us a little bit about what we did?
Yes, my unmute button got away from me for a moment there. Yeah, so we were able to work together on providing access through technology, but also through seed funding to folks with low and moderate income to really look at what the possible effects and impacts of inclusive technology design, as well as seed funding, were on investing outcomes for underrepresented populations. So we put together a pilot program that took place over 7 months and provided 241 participants with $250 in seed funding, and then used public's investing application or the community layer of public's investing application to also connect participants with each other, as well as connecting some of them with access to mentors, and interact both with each other and with those mentors throughout the time that the pilot was running. We'll talk a little bit about outcomes in a moment, and also are looking forward to working together on a larger national pilot for thinking more about investor identity and digging into what that means to folks moving forward.
And why don't you just go ahead and tell us what did we find? What were the key takeaways?
Jump right into
please.
outcomes. So I think two things really stood out. The first is that people crave learning opportunities. Learning opportunities looked like community interactions, so learning from one another, mentoring interactions, as well as educational content that provided overviews and sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of different investing practices and things like that. The second finding being that seed funding is a really effective way to get people started, especially if the financial piece has been a barrier or just a reason to pause and to think about, is this money that I could potentially risk losing? There understandably is risk involved in investing. And I think also through the work that we did together, some of the recommendations that are outlined in the report that Commonwealth put together on the pilot, which can maybe be shared in the chat if folks want to dig deeper into it. Seed funding, it was one of the main recommendations that came out of it as a win-win for new investors and for the tools the platforms, et cetera, that they're using, that they provide a way for people to learn by doing in a way that can really get people over that initial sort of hump into feeling like this is something that they can participate in. The second recommendation and sort of like seed of knowledge that came from this is opportunities for community interaction in platforms like ours increase both comfort and belonging. I think historically investing is something that is a super solo activity for individuals, that you're, trying to take in information and make decisions on your own. And I think there can be a lot of hesitation around, is this the right decision? I don't know. And so being able to interact with other people and sort of hear different perspectives, different ways of thinking is helpful in terms of that decision-making piece or like nervousness piece that can be there, but also a sense of belonging. We talked about the narrative piece earlier and being surrounded by people who you feel like you have things in common with, and watching them be on a similar journey has a lot of value. And then the third piece is that embedding learning opportunities directly into an investing platform or an investing experience makes knowledge more actionable. I think one thing that I think a lot about from the financial technology side is that we are not able to give people direction about what they should or shouldn't do to make smart investments or smart financial decisions. That being said, because we are providing access to tools that allow people to invest, or we'll just keep it to investing for the sake of this, it's also our responsibility to provide people with the context to really understand the actions that they're taking, or the context around the tools that they're using, so that they feel empowered to make those decisions for themselves. That if that education or information is in the same place, that it's so much more seamless to sort of take in knowledge and then put it to use directly in that same place, rather than fragmenting the experience for folks.
Thanks, Willa. And I just want to underscore one thing from what you said. We did a ton of research. This is Commonwealth before designing this pilot. And something we heard over and over again is people said, this just isn't for me. And when you pushed, so, well, look at the kinds of people. And I saw a comment, I think, that went by in the chat along these lines. And as we talked a little bit about in our pre-call, boy, that doesn't seem like a reason why people shouldn't have a choice, a sense that they're just not welcome. It's just not built for them. And after running this pilot, we saw a movement from 25% to 65% of participants said, I feel confident in being able to make investment choices. And to be clear, these were all people who opted in, who wanted to have this experience. So I really think the point of even a modest amount of seed funds gives people a chance to experience something that might have felt off limits, and that is profound. I do want to move us on. Thank you. This is a great conversation. We have a lot of ideas to cover. Investing in capital markets is a path to wealth creation, a proven one. But I want to talk briefly about another one. Working with support from the MetLife Foundation, we've done some deep work on credit building and credit repair, specifically with an eye to wealth creation. And while the idea of helping households build credit or even repair credit is not a new one, and lots of people have done fabulous work on this, we found a really important opportunity to intentionally link that work to this idea of wealth creation and wealth aspirations and financial aspirations. So we had an opportunity to work with a leading credit building fintech, a mission-driven fintech called Lockbox. And we did extensive consumer research with over 400 people to really understand their experience, and came up with some messaging and design adjustments that really try to link credit repair to financial aspirations and wealth. And what we found after testing that is that people who participated in the new revised version, if you will, of this tool lifted their credit scores by an average of 52 points, and that 88% of those who participated in the pilot were able to successfully apply for credit after completion of the pilot. And it's really basic and important stuff, being clear about the link to financial aspirations from credit building work, being transparent about the tools and approaches and costs, and providing supplemental information that people want. So I invite you to read all about it. I feel like we're directing you several times to our website, but that is the place to get all of the quotes. This one, or all of the information. This one is a case study in credit building on buildcommonwealth.org. But this is a really different approach to think about wealth creation. And I just wanted to give Tia a chance to weigh in here, because in your position, leading the MetLife Foundation and really thinking across a whole portfolio of different financial health and wealth creation strategies, are there any thoughts or comments you want to add about this concept of credit building and how it relates to wealth creation?
Yeah, thank you for teeing that up and the background on it. I think I will say a couple of things. I think globally, but globally, access to credit is really important. But when I land the plane, specifically in the U.S., it's very important. Obviously, our society, our culture, credit is immensely important. Credit's immensely important around the world. But just to centralize the points around the U.S. So much of what we're able to acquire from a wealth building standpoint, access, you have to have really good credit. And if you do not, we know that people with poor credit pay more or are not able to buy a home. Maybe entrepreneurs who may have maybe not the best credit and may not be able to expand a business that is ready for growth. And that's just an example, because you have to have credit in order to do that. So it's immensely important. When we look at it from our own portfolio, once again, financial health is really center of the plate of the work that we do. And we've evolved our work to now include economic inclusion and resilient communities. But we look at financial health across all of our portfolios because it is central to all of our lives. Access to credit, having good credit scores is important, especially for low-income communities, individuals, and families, in particular if they do not have intergenerational wealth. In fact, we are funding a project in New York City that is working to increase the credit scores of Black and Latinx entrepreneurs to help them increase their credit scores, but then also with the thought of, and I think Willis said it best, thinking about the long term, when they're launching their business or trying to grow or sustain or grow their business, do they have access to credit that enables them to do that? I think it is a really important pillar if we are to look at our financial health portfolio. So moving beyond income generation or income and into wealth, that's where it becomes really important to have that important almost foundation. Building block is another word you can say. And it is those building blocks that enable both low-income people, women, and people of color to obviously have a greater opportunity at wealth building. And then if we also take a look from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but we do know that many entrepreneurs of color, for example, often borrow from friends and family, which is really important as well. But once again, going back to in terms of growing a business or expanding it, it is hard to tap those networks again, and you have to have good credit in order to do that. And their ability to generate income and provide for their family is immensely important. And so access to credit is that. So I hope that's been a little bit helpful and that I've answered your question on that particular piece of it, but really thank Commonwealth for all the work that you've done on looking at credit as a part of the wealth building toolbox for people across the country. And also, I think also applicable globally as well.
Thanks, Tia. I think that image of building block seems like a really powerful and appropriate one when we think about cross-cutting issues like credit. Really appreciate that. I want to ask us to shift gears again, and I want to do a little bit on innovation and wealth creation, wealth building. And maybe to get us started, this is something that we have thought a good deal about and wondered a good deal about on our team, and what the potential and role of innovation and technology change might be in wealth creation and democratizing access to wealth. And one idea, just to kind of make that series of words a little bit concrete, one idea that we've studied and are really excited about is the idea of shared ownership. There are some assets that might be acquired and held onto and realize appreciation from in a group, whether that's family members, community members, faith community, or some other kind of community. And like most good ideas, this is not an entirely new one. There are precedents for this. But one thing we know about a lot of wealth creation is that there can be significant entry barriers, and especially costly assets, imagine real estate in one's community, can be really difficult for individuals to acquire on their own. We know that there are things called real estate investment trusts that are accessible to more wealthy and sophisticated investors. And it's an interesting question if we now have new tools and technologies that might create that same opportunity, make it more accessible to people living on low and moderate incomes. And at the risk of putting a lot on the table at once, it's interesting when you start to look at real estate, shared ownership generally, or with regard to real estate. Some of the challenge are the frictions involved, the legal agreements that are necessary, the trust arrangements, the record keeping, the way that you build trust among a community. Here, I mean trust small t, not the banking service of a trust. How do you do that in a way that's cost efficient? When you're thinking about, a large sophisticated investor pool, you can absorb a certain amount of cost to do all of this. But many of those functions, ways to combat or address those frictions, conceptually are actually well suited to distributed ledgers or blockchains. Blockchains offer public, transparent, immutable records of ownership, the possibility of smart contracts, and the promise of all of that happening at low cost. So that's a whole webinar unto itself to unpack that, but I want to throw out this idea that technologies that we might associate in one context, for example, cryptocurrency, might actually pay dividends in other contexts like shared ownership. So with that headspace, I wanted to turn it back to the panel and ask for your thoughts about innovation and wealth creation and technology innovation. And Tia, maybe we'll go to you first on this one. I think you have some from our pre-conversation. I know this is something on your mind.
Willa might be better able to answer.
Either way.
I'll jump in after you.
Okay. What I will say, I will be radically transparent with the audience and everyone who hears this after today's live. I am still learning about blockchain and all of the currencies. The crypto hasn't had a very good week most recently, but I think it's important, one, from an education and knowledge standpoint, that some of our most vulnerable or marginalized communities are aware of the potential and the opportunity. I'm always big on that. I think that is significantly important. And blockchain, cryptocurrency, and we're even exploring metaverse as well. One, from a financial inclusion, financial health standpoint, but also as we're looking at workforce training and future of work and variety of skill sets, the ability to learn. I just think we have to really invest the time and effort in these, for me as an older person, emerging technologies. They've probably been around for a lot of folks, but newer emerging technologies. And I think they have an opportunity to be game changers for low-income communities. But I think understanding what that opportunity is, making sure there's equitable access to the table. And one thing that we did touch on, Tim, previously was the necessity to have representation at the table. So when we talk about women and communities of color, a lot of these technologies are already in formation or they're being updated. Where are the voices from these communities to make sure that the technologies are accessible and are fairly representative of low-income communities, people of color, and women? I think we've seen some of that with AI. All the algorithms that can be biased, and that is because not enough diverse or representation is at the table. So knowledge is important, representation is important, and really clearly delineating for our communities how these technologies can help them build wealth, the opportunity and the potential, but also to understand the risks that are there as well. So I'll turn it over to you. You're probably much more adept than I am.
I still feel like I'm trying to stay on top of all the developments in all these new asset classes. But I think one of the interesting things about crypto and blockchain technology is some of the things that you just mentioned, Tia. The first being transparency of, if systems have been designed to benefit certain individuals over time, then those who haven't been sort of brought along are interested in having a more clear line of sight into how these things are working, to sort of build trust in some of these things. And I also think that some of the elements of what blockchain technology is building is allowing more people to be at the table, to be part of building these things that may not have been included in the past. And so I think for those reasons, it's something that I'm certainly curious to see how we leverage this technology moving forward. And something that, Tim, we talked about prior to this conversation was crypto is an investing or an asset class that we added to public during the time that we were doing a pilot with Commonwealth. And I think that's in line with how we're trying to think about what innovation and what we can do with technology to play a valuable role here. And I think for us, that's meant, how can we think about, bringing all these emerging asset classes into a central place where people can learn about them, invest a small amount of money in them if it's something that they're interested in, to sort of see how it works and learn about that asset class in comparison to others, sort of by doing, for the same reasons that we talked about value of seed funding. And so I think crypto has been a big one there. But the markets continue to change, the types of investments continue to change. Real estate, you mentioned, there are all sorts of different sorts of alternative asset types, and how can we continue to provide people with context for what these things are to help them make decisions around, is this something that's for me, or is this something that I want to learn more about or invest in? So that's what I'd add there.
Thank you both. I appreciate all those comments, and maybe just to underscore, Tia, I think your point about who is involved in the creation of technology, who is involved in the testing, who's there, who's at the table, and representation, boy, that resonates if we want some of these promising innovations to serve this work. We have a little less than 10 minutes left, and I did want to make some space for audience questions, so we're going to pivot over to that now. Just a note about the technology: if you can send your questions through in the Q&A function, as distinct from the chat function. There's been so much activity on the chat, which is fabulous. I hope you all are answering one another's questions, but I don't think it's realistic for us to catch all of that. So in the Q&A, one of the questions that we have is, should our discussion be organized into two parts? Part one might be how to make reparations for past discrimination against minorities and women. Part two might be how to ensure that wealth building processes are fair and equitable going forward. Does this make sense? So I'm curious if either of you would like to offer any thoughts about that question. Well, whoever's our question asker, you've asked a good one, because we're all giving it some serious thought.
I would say, wow, you could, I would say a couple of things. One, and 1 hour is not sufficient for the conversation, because I think there's a lot to chew on, and everybody has a slightly different vantage point, and that's important because the perspectives are important. And so I do think the conversation around reparations is important to address. And that should probably, wow, Tim, we could have a whole conversation on that. And there'd be several, I think, leading thought partners on reparations. One, what does it mean? Two, how does it materialize or manifest? And just like the chat is active today, the chat would be super active on what reparations look like, because everybody has a slightly different way of thinking about how reparations should manifest. But I do think how to make right past discrimination. Yeah, wealth building are fair. I think fairness and equity should be ideally at the center. I just go back to some of the earlier comments around narrative. I'm looking at the chat. Yes, I said low income people. I need to reverse that. Even I get sucked into not saying things the right way. So narrative matters. So thank you to everyone in the chat for calling that out. But fairness and equitable, but I also think that there's a part of narrative that is in that. And who do we deem to be deserving? How that conversation comes about around who is deserving, around reparations, around the wealth building processes, what is fair, what is equitable. Those are really difficult issues to suss through, and you could spend oodles of hours really just debating and thinking about it and working through it. We all have a really hyper local, regional, and live life experience that would, I think, have a variety of interesting aspects to that conversation. So I think I answered the question. Y'all will tell me if I didn't in the chat. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think you were great to start us. So I really appreciate that. Willa, do you have anything you want to add on this one?
No, I think I appreciate Tia's response, and don't feel like I have sufficient expertise on the first part of the question to add much more there.
Totally fair. And I guess my reaction is that there's something really constructive about distinguishing between what got us to here and what we do going forward. So maybe I'll just offer that reflection. I think we have time for one more question. So I'll read this. I'm curious to know how responsible it is to present crypto as an asset to invest in, especially for low-income individuals starting their journey to investing, given crypto is so risky compared to other asset classes. Would love to hear the panel's take on this. So Willa, I feel like this one we might start with you.
Yeah, I think I agree that, you know, it's an asset class that does carry a higher level of risk, and that's something that that shouldn't be ignored. And I think the other piece of this is that we've talked a lot about wanting to make sure that access to certain asset classes isn't limited to certain groups of people. And so when we thought about adding crypto as an available asset on public, I think we spent more time thinking about how can we make sure that we're providing as much information as possible so that folks understand the potential risks, and then can sort of assess whether that is something that they are willing to take on. And we did that in many ways via technology, and so certain risk labels and things like that. And we don't necessarily need to get into all of that, but I think sort of my broad takeaway is there's a lot of responsibility involved with providing access, and so taking on the pieces of contextualizing and making sure that people have as full a picture of possible as what this investment type entails to make that decision for themselves is valuable. And I think, Tim, you had mentioned seeing during the pilot that understanding the risk, it wasn't necessarily something that folks were taking to in large amounts, sort of because of that understanding potentially.
Yeah, I'll just say very briefly, speaking for Commonwealth, we struggled a lot with whether to allow, we had an option in conversation with public whether to allow crypto once they introduced it on the platform. We ultimately decided to allow it in the context of the pilot because we were providing seed funds. So we felt that provided some measure of flexibility, and we were deeply curious to see what the response would be. And Willa has already alluded, it was actually very modest take-up. And I just would repeat what I think, Willa, you already said. What is really important is to help people who are beginning to invest be as knowledgeable and clear as they can about what their goals are and what are the ways to achieve those goals. There is something, and Tia, I saw your head nodding. I know we're going to run short on time, but you may have thoughts on this. There is something uncomfortable about standing between somebody and something that they want or they read about in the newspaper that makes me uncomfortable. But it is I think it's a really tough question. We are approaching time, so I want to bring us, we're actually at time. So I want to thank, first of all, Tia and Willa for spending the time and our preparation conversations to be with us today. I know that we didn't get to all of the questions, much less all of the chat. I think there's some great, rich stuff in there. And I guess as a way of wrapping up, I just appreciate that all of you recognize the importance of the wealth conversation and are open to thinking creatively about the challenge going forward and to consistently linking it back to questions of equity and closing racial wealth gaps, gender wealth gaps, and the intersection of those wealth gaps. And with that, we'll thank you and wish you the best for the rest of your day.
Thanks so much.